It's an absolute delight to be here. Thank you all for turning up to Rubicon. It's been a dream of Rob's and I for a few years, but without the actual participation and all of those people involved volunteering, this would not have happened. It's an absolute delight, again, to meet again. How are you?
It's good to see you, Greg.
We should arm wrestle. I think
I think you'd win hands down.
You had a good week? Good week?
Yeah. It was a very strange week because I ended up in Arizona. Not, but I didn't end up.
Is that the strange part, or?
I didn't end up. No, I was in Arizona. I was speaking at Google. Have this their version of the TED Talks, which is called Zeitgeist, and they kind of, I think, debased their currency profoundly by having me as one of the keynote speakers.
Yeah, I would believe that.
And but it was very interesting because you go to Arizona, Scottsdale, Arizona, and you sit down on a panel with J.J. Abrams, the director, with Jeffrey Katzenberg, the head of Disney, with Sean Penn, and it's all very rock and roll. And then there's me. So that was all. I think it was a bit of a shock to the people. But they want to talk about Europe and the economy, etc. But what you do come back from the States with is an extraordinary sense of optimism, which you don't get here. And it's really like going to Mars or something, you know. You sit down, and of course, at one of those Google events, you will get people who are evangelical about the way they see the world, not least because they have been quite successful in the last couple of years at proselytizing through the net. You know, these are charities, so it's quite interesting. It's not really a business issue, it's more business and arts and lots of charities. And it was, for me, when you're based here, it's lovely to go and see people like that. But of course, it's funny, Bill Clinton was the keynote speaker. And
I know him well.
I know him well. But what is amazing about Clinton is that he has that amazing combination of the factual and the rational with the deep spiritual, which I believe comes from his Baptist tradition. And he's an amazing communicator. And even now, you can see the vast majority of Americans who are there really wish that Clinton could run again. Because he knows everything about everything. It's amazing. You listen to him, you ask him, he knows, and I've heard him speak, you know, a couple of times before, and he really is an exceptional communicator. And then the week culminated, I sound very braggy, by interviewing Bono yesterday at the.
So this is a close second then.
This is a close second. This is the culmination of the whole
Clinton,
week.
Katzenberg, Bono.
Yeah, Greg.
Yeah,
it's all good. It's all good. And that
you're welcome.
It's
by the way, you're welcome.
And that was interesting because it was at this Founders. I don't know if there's been a big technology conference going on, organized by a guy called Paddy Cosgrove, a lovely young guy, and he's done something amazing, which is he has managed to bring, you know, the CEOs of the up-and-coming startup companies, and not so much up-and-coming, many that have already come and have begun to go into the third and fourth and fifth startups, and he brought them to Ireland initially 4 years ago, and I went to the first one, and it's like everything, and I think this should give all of us hope in terms of getting things up off the ground. I said, Paddy, how are you doing? And he said, well, we'll see how it goes. This year, he was able to have Larry Summers, the former head of Harvard, the American Treasury Secretary, and Bono talk on the issue of charity, one, and the issue of aid in general. And I'm one of the people who is always amazed at the begrudgery in this country towards Bono. He is a wonderful person. He's really, really good company. He does enormous amounts of good. And what you find in Ireland is just a begrudger's paradise against him. And I find it very difficult to accept, number one, actually, to accept. I'm not quite as angry as Patsy would be, but so. And
do you find begrudgery much in your position?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
You gotta love it.
Yeah.
No, you do. But
how do you deal with begrudgery just as a human being? I mean, and you're a public figure, you're an author, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But like, it's still.
Well, I think that you've got to understand that for some people, the criticism is meant to hurt.
Okay.
That defines their day.
Right.
Which is unusual for me because I couldn't understand how you might feel that way. But, you know, on the one hand, you know, if you're up there and you publish books, or you do documentaries, or you do TV programs, or whatever, or you write columns and you agitate for certain positions, of course you're going to take the flack, and that's understandable. And I think it would be, if you didn't get any flack, then you'd be, probably a little bit more worried. But I do think in Ireland there is sometimes a meanness of spirit.
Okay.
And I think we all see it all the time. And it's just part of the great tapestry that makes us this odd nation.
Well, in your opinion, how can that change?
I don't think it can. I don't think. I think it's a matter of size, I think Churchill said one thing quite interesting. He says, the worth of a man should never be judged by the quantity of his friends, but by the quality of his enemies. And I believe that if you stand for something, you will have enemies. Mm-hmm. And the man who doesn't have enemies is the man who doesn't have a backbone. You've got to stand up. It's the easiest thing to do is say, oh, yeah, you're right, and yeah, you're right, and we'll go this way, and be malleable and sort of jelly-like.
Yeah.
But I think if you do stand up for things, and you do say, okay, I think this is right and this is right, then you will create criticism, and that is right. Yeah. But I think there's a difference between constructive criticism or objective criticism and the sort of personal stuff that you get a little bit here.
Sure. Walter Brueggemann talks about that we criticize to energize. And if there's a point to it, then if
it's great.
It leans forward. Exactly.
I mean, but it's interesting when you come back from the States that the encouragement given to people in America is something that must sustain them and must make it easier to innovate and to go out on your own. I've no doubt of that. And the discouragement given to people here must then manifest itself in a type of a groupthink. Right. And I've always been very intrigued by this, by the conventional wisdom and the tyranny of conventional wisdom here in Ireland. I think it was Galbraith said that conventional wisdom is never really overwhelmed by a conflicting idea, but conventional wisdom is always overwhelmed by events, that events just destroy things. And I think in Ireland we're conditioned to groupthink. We saw it in the economy in the last few years. And we don't necessarily, we find oppositional thinking hard to take. We find it threatening rather than being opened up to it. Okay. And I think that's where we fall down, because if you think like the Leaving Cert, I look at the education system. I look at my own children. One of my children's dyslexic. Mm-hmm. She thinks in a totally different way to the rest of the world. Yeah. The education system destroys her. Yeah. I mean, it really, what we do is we reward a certain type of individual for being blessed by thinking a certain way, and we punish another type of individual. So Ireland is full of people who actually believe, full of brilliant people who actually believe they're stupid, because the education system has destroyed them. And it's only when you have children and you see them doing their homework and you sit down with them all the time and you realize that we have this almost industrial approach to education. Let's just get them through the system, get them into the point system, and all that sort of stuff. And so what it does is that I know many, many of my good friends who in subsequent life have done wonderful things, and you talk to them and they'll say to you, I hated school. I mean, how many people do you know, brilliant people, who said, I hated school? But actual fact, school hated them. That's what it was. That the system, and this comes back to the groupthink and the conventional wisdom, that we reward linear thinkers who have a certain type of brain that can kind of stack information and then regurgitate. And we punish lateral thinkers who are slightly different.
So how do we then? I mean, Ireland is historically...
And we're going off the point completely.
Of course you are. It's what I've grown to love about you. But like, historically, Ireland is known for its arts and to putting its head above the parapet. And when it has, it's changed the world. I mean, it has. I mean, with developing nations, with the arts, I
understand that we have had...
so how do we get back to that?
Brilliant individuals who've done very well.
But those are the ones who have put their head above the parapet and actually have gone on beyond the criticism.
And most of them actually were successful abroad initially.
Yes.
No, I think you just have to get on with it. It's like life. It's like anything. You need to have reservoirs of emotional stability, of intellectual stability.
Where does David McWilliams get his stability from?
Well, that's presupposing I have the stability. No. This is all a big act. No, I think that where you get your stability, I think as you get older, you realize it's from your family background in many ways.
And what is your background?
Well, I suppose it was interesting when I was listening to Patsy talking about people not drifting over and back. I'm probably very unusual in the sense that my father's side were very odd. They were Scottish immigrants to Ireland in the 1920s. And my grandmother was of the Presbyterian faith, and my grandfather was Catholic. And my grandmother, was quite Christian in her outlook and quite stubborn. And my mum is from Cork, and she's a retired school teacher, which is anybody is the son of a school teacher, they'll know how difficult that can be as an inheritance. And but she's a really lovely person and has always given me extraordinary love and affection. And now I realize that, I can see that. And religiously, I suppose there was a blend. And my wife is from the north and is an unusual mix of Brethren and Presbyterian and Church of Ireland. So we're really mixed up. Wow. And but it does give you an unusual take on the world, because you're exposed to family members who think differently and maybe have a different notion of how the world works. And but I think the core, if you ask me, Greg, is love and softness. Our family are very soft. Okay. And I never.
What defines soft?
Well, there's a lot of. When I went to university, I remember meeting young guys my own age who seemed to be obsessed with impressing their dad, for example. Yeah. That there was a expectational relationship, and I never had that. Are driven with ambition in order to prove themselves. I never had that. I think my parents always. On the one hand, they pushed me to do the right thing in terms of, you should study and all that sort of stuff. But there was never an overwhelming expectation on my shoulders that I had to prove anything to anybody, particularly in the family. And I think that now that I have children, I think that's a very important characteristic, which is to understand that we're all totally different. Yeah. And the impact of the real world on us has very, very different manifestations and different characters. And the beauty is the difference and the diversity and the lack of conformity. And I would say that that's what we should try in as much as possible in everything we do, not just with our own family, but everyone we meet, is to try and bring out. If you think about it, you look at the world and it's full of people with amazing abilities that sometimes, because they haven't got the opportunity or because they haven't had the right schooling or because the school attacked them, that doesn't come out, it doesn't blossom. And I'm intrigued that everybody I meet, again, as I get older, you meet people, the most fascinating people, for whom the world, just the bounce of the ball wasn't right, something didn't go right one time, and there's a couple of things, and then suddenly you get into a downward spiral, and that changes you. So I think that it's very important, particularly in school, to try and create a system of education that makes everybody feel that they have something really special inside them. And every child feel that they have something really special inside them. And that is a body of work which might take 3 or 4 generations, but it's worth pursuing.
Well, David, it says here that you are Ireland's most influential economist. True?
That's Penguin.
They're not an Irish company, right?
Yeah.
You're columnist of the Irish Independent Sunday Business Post, and you're the author of the bestsellers, The Pope's Children, The Generation Game, and Follow the Money. And this is your
the new one,
book.
yes. It's out next week. And it's very important that if you look at the acknowledgements...
Yes, I'm about to do that. Just the thing here. It says here that I love Greg Fromholz. No, that's not what it says. It actually says in here, where's the acknowledgements at, David? Here they are. Yeah. It does actually say, we would like to think, one of the characters of the book could not have been created without the guidance and the biblical knowledge of 2 people, and also Pastor Rob Jones, who leads the New Expressions congregation in Dublin.
So there you go. No, I went...
My name is missing, and
Greg, I'm sure if we sell well...
We have Bono, we have Bill Clinton, but where's me? I don't know. It's just... Sorry, you just keep talking. That's right. Yeah, I know. But tell me, this book, why it's called The Good Room, and the subtitle is why we ended up in a debtor's prison and how we can break
Yeah.
free.
Uh,
So I'm going to ask you the premise of the book.
the good room is based really on I think, an Irish national weakness. My granny in Cork had a good room. Did anybody's granny have a good room? Okay.
Yeah.
Exactly. So my
It's at the front.
my granny, well, in our case, it probably occupied about 78% of the house.
Is that right?
The square footage of the house.
Was the plastic still on the
Yeah,
sofa?
yeah. And my granny had this good room that was so good that I wasn't good enough to go into it. And in actual fact, none of our family were good enough to go into it.
So much for a soft
It was
family.
kept for kind of gooder people, you know. And when the people who were obviously better than us used to come to my granny's house in Cork, and myself and my cousins were lined up like little soldiers, scrubbed to within an inch of our lives. And I remember we weren't encouraged to speak until we were spoken to by the good people. And you know, when you're 5 or 6, your head is melted by all this stuff. And I couldn't figure out why these people were better than us, but I knew that my granny's accent changed.
Nice.
She sounded like a cross between, you know, she was a Cork publican, okay? She ran a bar in Cork, right? So this is right. And when the good people came into the room, she sounded like a cross between, I don't know, the Queen Mother and Marty Morrissey or something. It was just weird, you know? And I just wanted to give her a big hug and say, come back. What happened, Granny? And but you know, all these memories stay with you when you get older. And it was basically about my granny and everybody's granny here trying to pretend that she was posher and richer and more resourceful than she actually was. And she pretended, and then the really good people pretended too, because they knew we lived 5 to a room in the back. But they went through the charade, and my granny would bring out china and pretend that we ate off this every day, and all that stuff, right? So this is deep in it's Irish insecurity.
Yeah.
And I feel that mentality stays with us as a nation. We don't have the strength or the security to stand up for ourselves. And consequently, the new good room is negotiating with Brussels. So we go into the good room, okay, and we're just delighted to be there, right? To be there with the French people and the German people, right? Because they're really good, and we know that we're not as good as them. So, for example, when we're really like my granny, we're absolutely terrified of being kicked out of the good room, right? Like someone saying, you don't eat off china. Or that person on the wall with the mortarboard isn't related to you, right? Because I was sure there was a guy in our grannies with a mortarboard, went to university, and nobody knew who he was. So when I see our negotiators, like even yesterday, I see them coming home. You know, and in fairness, Patsy, the Irish Times has been agitating that we'll get a good deal. But and we come home with our tail between our legs, and we don't stand up for ourselves. Because what is happening is we go in to negotiate in the good room, and so the French guy, like, you know, our opposite number meets his French guy, and he's Jean-Claude, and he's very sophisticated.
They always
and
are.
he has 5 lovers and everything, and our lads are just like, whoa, this is. Don't kick us out, man. I'm loving all this stuff.
I end at 7 lovers.
And then Jean-Claude says, I believe your banks are busted. And he goes, no, they're not. And he said, I believe you. He said, don't worry, no. And then the Paddy says, he says, so don't worry, the 64 billion, now we have it. It's in a jar over the telly. We'll get it now after Coronation Street, you know. And the point is, rather than standing up for ourselves, we ingratiate ourselves. The Americans have a great expression, which is, you don't get what you deserve, you get what you negotiate, okay? And at every single juncture, we have backed down. Rather than seeking, it reminds me of school, you know, when I was in the classroom of school, I always loved the dynamic. You'd have, like, all the messers over here, who knew their station, there was value in numbers, and all the SWATs over there, and they knew their station, there was values in numbers, and then there was this horrible creature in the middle, right? The kind of lick arsey chap, right? Who didn't really know, who wanted to be a SWAT but wasn't clever enough, right? And was dead scared of the messers and just ended up running to the teacher all the time.
Yes.
Okay? And we're that person, right, when we negotiate. And that's the premise is that if you look to try and explain economic phenomena, go deep into our culture and deep into our family history, and you will find reasons there that explain the behavior of Ireland negotiating with Europe, which reveal why we negotiate differently to Spain. So, for example, it would seem totally logical to me for Ireland to seek common cause with Spain, with Italy, with Greece, with Portugal, because there's, again, strength in numbers in this bank deal. But rather than seek common cause with the people who are like us and the warm embrace of our equals, we tend to seek the frosty reception of our betters. So I was listening to, what's her name, Lucinda Crichton yesterday on the radio when I was driving around. And somebody was saying, oh, well, Miss Merkel has said that the debts, legacy debts, and she goes, oh, no, that's only for Spain. It's not for us. They're the messers over there. We're the good boys here. So again, what you get is rather than actually going with the people you have something in common with, we try to pretend like my granny used to do.
In the good room.
We were in the good room.
And the character in here, you were telling me a little bit earlier about, and we only have a couple minutes left here before we go on to a Q&A session. But the character in here, can you just give a really brief
the book is an unusual book because it's half fiction and half fact, and it's based on a woman called, the main character, I'll talk to you about the main character here, but Olivia Vickers is the hero of the book, and she is a 32-year-old pregnant woman. So the book is written through the eyes of a pregnant woman, and it's taken from the moment her little test goes blue, and she goes, oh, shit, all the way through to the birth in the comb, and it's each month. But that image came to me about, I was in a cafe just before Christmas in Dublin, and I was thinking, how am I going to do this? And I saw this woman, and she was like she was pregnant. She was probably about 7 or 8 months pregnant. And she was uncomfortable. You could see she was cranky, but she looked so happy. And she was, look, it's that beautiful thing that life goes on. You know, if Anglo goes bust or Ireland goes bust, it doesn't matter, actually. People fall in love, and they have babies, and they have children, they have concerns, they come home to their husbands or wives or whatever, and we all live. And I remember seeing her and thinking, you know, life does go on. In all this craziness, people behave as we've always behaved. So I thought then that we should look at she bought her house in 2005 at the very top of the market. She's now 32. This is her second child. She's a teacher in a school, but like all young teachers, she's a temporary teacher. She doesn't have the permanent and pensionable status of the older teachers. This is something I've done a lot through the Pope's Children generation, looking at generations. Her husband loses his job, like many hundreds of thousands of people, and she finds that the sums just don't add up, that she's always about 200 or 300 euros short every single month, which is the story of tens of thousands of people in the country. So that's her story. In the class, in the schoolroom, in the staff room, the dynamic is playing out in the following way. A lot of the older teachers are very well off, but some of the older teachers are having to face the fact that their kids who left 5 years ago, who are now down on their luck, are coming back to live at home, which is another phenomenon in Ireland. And one of the guys who's living at home is a guy called Damien Darcy, who worked for a large law firm, and that law firm got into a big kerfuffle, and he was the fall guy. That always happens in Ireland. The little guy gets stabbed. And anyway, the long and the short of it is he goes to Rob's church. Okay? And he finds God. And not only does he find God, he finds great solace in Leviticus and Deuteronomy and Amos and all the biblical teachings on debt forgiveness. And what drives him, and the biblical teachings on debt forgiveness are unambiguous, and they're interpreted in the New Testament and in the Old Testament. And what drives him then is a moral crusade to challenge in the courts on the behalf of people who are in debt based on Leviticus and Deuteronomy. So that is the narrative of the book. And there are 8 chapters, not 10 chapters of fiction of that particular story and the granny and all that sort of thing. And there's 10 chapters of economics which explain how it all knits together. And what I've always wanted to do is 2 things. I've always wanted to feminize economics. I always think that economics is too male. Okay. And it's too masculine and it's too abrupt. And it isn't emotional enough or flexible or soft enough. And the other thing is I want as many people as possible to read economics. And I think what happens in economics is that it repels people the way it's delivered. So hopefully by creating real characters. And the most important thing is to try to explain, Greg, that economics is just about us. Yeah. It's not about GDP figures or inflation, all that carry on, right? Yeah. All that stuff that I used to do when I worked in banks. That doesn't matter. It's about everybody on the dart and people on the bus. And it's the business of every person's life. Yeah. That's all it is. Yeah. And it's what we do when we make choices. And so by creating characters hopefully it will explain to people that, the great events of the day are only the aggregation of thousands of little events. And those little events are events in your life.
Yeah.
And you put them all together and that makes the economy.
Yeah.
So that's what the book is about. But there's a lot of Christian teaching in it, which means, as Patsy can obviously know, that I will get completely slagged in the reviews. Because you'll say, McWilliams is a Christian now.
So then I just have one last question. Is David McWilliams a Christian then? Is he, no. But tell me when...
Yes, I am.
Okay, and tell me,
of course.
And how would you define that? We have like 2 minutes left here. How would you define your faith?
I believe that faith is a code. It's a personal code, it's a personal way of living, it's a personal way of looking at the world, and it's anchored in love and radiating, if you can, as much as possible, love to others who need it. I think this is what makes us happy. When I look around the world, what makes people happy are the people who have beautiful personal relationships with other people. They're not rich. Wealth doesn't make you happy. In actual fact, I suspect the evidence is it makes you sad. Because I've worked in banking for many years, I've worked with many wealthy people.
Yeah.
And I can say, hand on heart, that most of them are sad, that they're not happy, that they have devoted their time to a false god, and that false god is mammon. And it might sound unusual coming from me because you see me on television talking about money all the time, but I actually don't care about it. And I think that what the best thing to do, and this is where the faith comes in, is that all Christians are given a set of codes and a set of rules for a reason. Those rules make you happy. They make you content. They actually protect you from yourself, number one, and others, number two. And I think it's crucial, to start with your own family and begin this process of actually extending love to people and understanding and generosity and charity and all those characteristics that are dismissed in the hard world of economics and finance, but are actually the gelling agents that keep us all together.
Great, David. Thank you very much for your time and your honesty, and the Good Room will be available in all good bookstores.
In all good
Round of applause. Awesome.